Yeah, good morning and welcome to the program. It's Know Your Right, our legal program on Lagoon Radio, your number one online gospel radio in Nigeria and official radio of the Anglican Communion Diocese of Lagos. We are transmitting live from the Diocesan Palace right here in Marina, Lagos. And yes, how is your day going? It's Friday, the 22nd day of April 2022. Sorry, we are starting a bit late. On the program. Remember, you can download our app on Google Play Store and Apple Store. You can also follow us on our social media platforms. On Facebook, Lagoon Radio Nigeria, and on Instagram and Twitter is Lagoonradio.Ng. And this morning, we'll be looking at domestic violence and the law. Yes, and our guest is a legal practitioner. She is the head, and she's the head legal and investor relations at Get Bondi, an edutech company targeted at secondary school education online. She is Barrister Kene Agwo. Barrister, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm good. Yes, so nice to speak with you once more on the program. Barrister.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go this way. What is domestic violence?
Okay. Domestic violence, in a simple meaning, is any sort of violence that occurs within an intimate or family setting. So it can be, as long as there's a form of familial relationship and there's violence occurring, that makes it domestic violence. And it can be in any form. It can be physical, sexual, emotional, financial. But as long as there's this form of abuse or attack within a familial setting.
Okay. When we talk about domestic violence, what can actually lead? What leads to domestic violence?
Well, it depends. Domestic violence can arise out of different factors. Usually, people who are abusers tend to be victims of domestic violence themselves. So it's a continuous cycle of abuse. Somebody's abused and then they get older, they start abusing other people. So that's one thing. Another thing is, we're human beings and we know as Christians the issue of original sin. So some people are just cruel. They weren't abused, they are just cruel and they just like to control and manipulate other people. For some, it's also mental illnesses. Some people are known as psychopaths or sociopaths, or they're narcissists, so they tend to be abusive towards others. They can only change through therapy. It's not as if they're doing it because they want to be cruel, but they just have this mental disorder that has made them, a psychopath, someone who doesn't have emotions and is antisocial. So it doesn't matter. No amount of preaching will change him. It's a mental disorder and he would need the help of a medical practitioner. So those are the three main causes. But it usually starts with the person or the person was a victim of domestic violence.
Okay, now, having said that now, who is a victim? Sometimes we tend to see it on the other gender, the female gender. Who is a victim or who are likely to be victims of domestic violence, the male or the female gender?
Anybody can be a victim of domestic violence. It doesn't have to do with gender. It doesn't have to do with age. It doesn't have to do with status even. Anyone can be a victim. I'll use the example of the case of Johnny Depp and his former wife, Amber Heard, which is trending right now because Johnny Depp took Amber Heard to court for libel. So Johnny Depp is one of the richest celebrities, known, established, most attractive man in the world. And over this time, yes, he's a victim of serious domestic violence. And so it can happen to anybody. It can happen to any gender. A victim is simply someone who has suffered domestic violence in whatever, whether it's verbal abuse or physical violence, whatever it is. It's someone who has suffered harm from violence from either a partner or a parent or somebody that is emotionally connected to him or her.
Okay, in Nigeria, in Africa, especially in Nigeria, we tend to be more emotional. And recently, what triggered this domestic violence was the late singer that was alleged to have been beaten by the husband and the rest of them. And a lot of people say in Nigeria, I'm trying to get the statistics, but a lot of people say in Nigeria that the female gender are always prone to the domestic violence more than the male gender. That the number of the female gender is more than the male gender. Is that a true statement?
Okay, so the thing with that is that, well, according to statistics, men are most likely to be perpetrators of physical or economic or financial domestic violence, and that's because men are physically stronger than women. Men tend to control more of the finances. So there's another part of domestic violence is the play on power. So that's why a parent is more likely to abuse their child than a child will abuse their parent, because the parent has more power or is in a better position of power than the child. Somebody who is richer and stronger, has power over someone who is weaker or less, has less money or whatever. So it's just because of that position of power that you might find that men tend to be perpetrators, more often than not, perpetrators of domestic violence. But, domestic violence can really work both ways. There are men who rarely talk about it. No one would have known Amber Heard was abusing Johnny Depp until she accused him of domestic violence, and then later on, and nobody believed him until a recording came out about 2 years ago, where it was saying that she was the one who was abusing him in the marriage. But for men really talk, men really speak out. Men, they take things they just take things as they are different from women in the terms of how they react to domestic violence. So we don't really know what the real statistics are. But if you follow the statistics, yes, men are more of the perpetrators, but women also can be emotionally abusive. They can also be physically violent. If a man loves a woman, he might not want to harm her. And if he's well trained and brought up, he might not want to react because he knows that he's stronger than her. So women can take advantage of that and be physically violent when they know that there'll be no consequences. So that's what I'll say about that.
Okay, now what are the effects of domestic violence?
The effects of domestic violence can be in various forms, depending on what form the domestic violence has taken. But usually to be psychologically first, because it's difficult for somebody to start to physically abuse somebody without having mentally or psychologically damaged that person or taken advantage of that person in some way. So, psychologically, you'll be affected in the sense that you might feel like this person still loves me. So this thing that they're doing to me, it might just, you make excuses for that person. So already that's a form of psychological damage. Even if it's just emotional or verbal violence, you would, in verbal abuse, you might just be like, oh, you make excuses for that person. So the first and foremost thing is the psychological effect. Now, when it comes to this physical violence, obviously, damage to your person, damage to yourself, you're at risk of serious harm to your life or to your health. Then if it's financial abuse, then, obviously you don't have control over your life, you don't have control over your finances or your choices and things like that. So that it just depends on how the abuse is being perpetrated. But the first thing foremost is there's always a psychological effect to it.
Okay, you're still listening to Know Your Right, our legal program on Lagoon Radio. We've been talking to Barrister Kene Agwo, and our topic today is domestic violence and the law. We'll go on this short break. When we come back, we'll look at the factors that can trigger domestic violence and also what the law says about domestic violence. Don't go anywhere. Keep listening to us. We'll be right back after this break. Okay, you're still on to our Lagoon Radio, Know Your Rights, our legal program on Lagoon Radio, your number one online gospel radio in Nigeria and the official radio of the Anglican Diocese of Lagos. And we are transmitting live from the Archbishop's Palace right here in Marina, Lagos. Yes, and it's a beautiful Friday morning. And we are talking about domestic violence and the law. We've been talking to Barrister Kene Agu. She is the head legal and investor relations at Gate Bondi, an edutech company targeted at secondary school education online. Before we go to Barrister, what factors can really trigger the domestic violence? Hello, can you hear me? I can barely hear what you're saying, but yes, I'm trying to figure it out now. I can barely hear you. Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you perfectly.
I can hear you now. Okay. What factors can trigger domestic violence?
Okay. If you're referring to the factors that can trigger domestic violence in the, let's say, in the perpetrator that would make him want to commit violence, the reason why I wouldn't want to pick out on anything is because, to avoid a case of victim blaming, because most times, people might want to be like, oh, what did the other person do? Maybe it was the way you talked to him or whatever. So I wouldn't want to point out that there's something that can trigger it, because somebody who is a perpetrator of abuse, domestic violence, will use, anything. Will say anything is their trigger. So we don't want to point. They themselves know what their triggers are. It could be, they feel they're losing control of the other person. It can be that they feel that they need to dominate that other person. So whatever instance or opportunity that they find, that can trigger them to, always find something to use to dominate that person. But you can't specify what that is. It's only the abuser that knows when that situation arises to him. When you see somebody who is a victim of domestic violence, there's no advice you can give to that person. Say, oh, don't do this, then he will not abuse you or whatever, or she will not abuse you. There's absolutely nothing you can do to prevent or avoid the abuse. Only the abuser knows what makes him want to, or what makes her want to dominate and control another human being.
Okay, now looking at the law, what does the law say about domestic violence?
Okay, so in Nigeria, there are two laws that we deal with domestic violence, and we have the Violence Against Persons Act, and um, in respect of Lagos State, so some states, it's not all the states in Nigeria that have adopted the act. So Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, VAPP, which was passed in 2015. So the states that have, passed this as their law: Anambra, Bauchi, Ekiti, Enugu, Kaduna, and Oyo states. And there's also in Lagos State, the Protection Against Domestic Violence Law, which was passed in 2007. So the law defines, what domestic violence is, and using the Lagos State law for an example, it goes ahead to define domestic violence, sexual abuse, emotional, psychological abuse, economic abuse, harassment. It defines all those things in the law, and it tells you, basically makes it an offense, provides the penalty, the consequences if you're an abuser. It also tells how the complainant, who is the victim, how the victim can bring a case against the abuser, or who can help such a victim in such cases. So the law basically defines, and the Lagos State law is really good at that. It really defines, in detail the different types of abuse that can happen. It doesn't limit it to just marriage. It also expands it to a dating relationship or any form of romantic relationship. As long as it occurs, in a home and in a family setting. So that's what the law says about domestic violence.
Okay, now having looked at the law and let's go to the marriage now. A lot of people, like the singer that just died, which triggered all this talk again. Now, is divorce really an option when there is domestic violence? Because we've had different opinions. Some people will say divorce is not an option. Some Christians will say Bible is against divorce, and the rest of them. So, is divorce really an option? And if it is, what steps are there to follow?
Okay, so in the Matrimonial Causes Act, there are different, there are two types of divorce in Nigeria: fault or no fault divorce. So, yes, when your husband or wife is abusive, it can be one of the it can come under one of the reasons that can lead to a divorce. However, like in terms of a real life situation, the law divorce is an option. It's an option that one can take because the domestic violence is a very serious matter, and your life, the very essence of your life, is being threatened. So, but I'm not a married person, so there's a limited kind of suggestion I can make. But as with all things, prevention is better than cure, right? If you can avoid marrying somebody that you can sense red flags, because the red flags usually are there. I won't say always, but usually you can see the red flags before you agree to marry such a person. So if you can avoid not marrying somebody that you can see red flags in, that would really help a lot of situations. But if you find that you're already in a marital relationship, first and foremost, remove yourself from the abuse. Now, do not tell the abuser that I'm going to leave. No, don't tell the abuser your next move. But what you must have in mind is that you need to leave that environment for your own safety. If you have children, for the safety of your children, because you cannot change that person. There's a scam people fall for before they get married. Oh, I can change him, or he will change with marriage. That's a scam. That almost never happens. Don't fall for that scam. If somebody is how you can see them before you get married, and something that you cannot tolerate or should not tolerate, because people can tolerate anything, but you shouldn't tolerate abuse. Please, talk to your family and friends and, listen to wise counsel. But if you find that you're already married, please, first thing is to remove yourself. Whether you take a divorce or not, it's up to you. It's based on your conviction or, whatever circumstances you have. But the most important thing is to leave the abusive environment. Talk to somebody that is wise. Some people give really bad advice. Oh, my husband is beating me, and then the person will not advise you. That's part of, no, don't talk to such people. Unfortunately, try and make friends. Have at least one friend that would always tell you the truth and cares for you. So, or if you're a Christian, the thing again, not every church would advise you to do the right thing. Some people say, continue to stay in the home. He will change with prayer. No. But I don't know. Like, as I said, I'm not in a married situation. I can't really advise. But the first and important thing is just leave the environment. And please don't tell your abuser that you are leaving. No, that would only make it worse.
Okay. Now, you are an academic, and looking at this, you are working for a company that is targeted at educating secondary school students. Now, why is it always hard for the victims of domestic violence to speak up?
Okay. So, as we spoke earlier, that psychological damage is what already makes it difficult. And it's also a shameful thing. Imagine, telling somebody, oh, that my husband or my wife is beating me or is abusing me. We all have this inbuilt self-worth or self-awareness where we know, we know that certain things are just not right. So telling another person there's this sense of shame, this kind of shame, if it's on, oh, I don't have, there's a shame associated with saying, oh, I don't have money, or I don't have this. Like there's a form of weakness it kind of shows, or there's also a form of empathy that some people have for even their abusers, that, oh, I don't want people to think that this man or woman is a bad person, or let me just manage him, or that kind of a thing. So or sometimes it can just be the psychological, hold that abuser has on you, that makes you feel that, you can't tell anybody because you're scared about what the abuser can.
Okay.
The abuser can threaten that if you. So obviously you want you wouldn't want that to happen, so you would not want to you wouldn't want to tell anybody because you're scared of your life. You don't want the abuser to kill you. So that's why it's usually hard, and especially for men. Men actually find it, hardest to actually speak up. As I said, I pointed out to be one of the wealthiest men and most attractive men in the world, and he could not speak up. The only thing that made him speak up was because he was falsely accused and lost his job, lost everything, and that's the only thing. In fact, that's what even made him even talk about it. So it's a very difficult thing, and you shouldn't blame the victim for not speaking up on time because it takes a lot of effort. But if we create more safe spaces and people that actually, if we understand that abuse is not the victim's fault, and there are people that actually do care, you will find that more people can speak up because they believe that, okay, this person will not judge me. They will not think that they will not think less of me because my husband is beating me or my wife is abusing me or anything like that. No, they will not think less of themselves. And so if we can have that safe space or whatever, it's to encourage more people to speak up because they know that people would want to help them and not judge them.
Okay, looking at this now, is there anything the government is doing in general to help curb domestic violence?
Okay, so in Nigeria, there's those states that have, those states I called out earlier that have adopted the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act. So NAPTIP, that's National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons. They are the agency that would assist, that can assist such people that are victims of domestic abuse and would like to report, I mean, you can report to the police. That's also another avenue. Then in Lagos State, there's a domestic and sexual violence response team that can also, their number, their email, contact details are available on their website. So you can also report to them. But also, this is not non-governmental agencies and also office, but the government at least has tried to take it seriously. But unfortunately, not all the states in Nigeria have adopted this Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act and have taken it as serious as they should. It's mostly, those states I mentioned that have very few, they're not even up to 10 that have adopted it. So, need more states that say.
Okay, now, since it's not all states that have adopted that measure, what can the victims do? Because earlier you talked about the victims being afraid of losing their lives and the rest of them. From the legal point of view, what can they do? Sometimes a lot of them are timid or to come out publicly to say or having no one to talk to. But since there is a law, what are they expected to do?
Well, the first and foremost thing is to remove themselves from the abusive situation. And that's the first call of action. They should not remain there because the person is not going to change. And there's nothing that they can do to change the person. The abuse happening not because of them, but happening only because of the person who is an abuser. So the police is an option that they can report to the police. Fortunately, there are also some non-governmental, organizations that might be able to help. And depending on what state, not every state is has the same opportunities that another state. Like Lagos now, Lagos, there's so many states, there's the government that is really supporting, but there's some states that unfortunately the person might not have access to that kind of care and might be left with maybe only their religious group to depend on, or their family or their friends. But I would just say, as human beings, just encourage us to have support groups, people that would tell us the truth, people that have our backs. That's that's the preventive measure. Before you get to that point, I realize that there's nobody I can run to. So if you're in a state where there's no, or speak to a lawyer. I believe that lawyers will have the duty of care towards anyone. So to speak to a lawyer, I think that's one. At least that's, if speaking to the police cannot help, speaking to a lawyer, I believe will help.
In Nigeria, where a lot of people are uninformed, and when we talk about speaking to or talking to a lawyer, a lot of people become afraid. Now, what is the best way to approach? And sometimes when it comes to lawyer, a lot of people are afraid also that it might cost them a lot of money. So, what advice are you giving to those victims? In a way, the best way to approach it.
Okay.
Okay.
It's unethical for a lawyer to reject a brief, and especially the nature of the brief.
Please start
One who
again.
needs
The network has been
advice,
bad.
legal advice. Can you hear me?
Let's get you again. Just just repeat what you just said.
Hello?
Just repeat what you just said. The network has been bad. I can hear you now.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay. So, so okay. So it's unethical for a lawyer to
Okay.
see, it would be unethical for a lawyer to see somebody who is in need of.
Okay, we'll get back to you. It's like the network has been frustrating. We'll get back to you. Okay, Baris, I was asking, in Nigeria, where a lot of people are uneducated or uninformed, and when we talk about seeing a lawyer, they see it as going to waste outrageous amounts of money. What's the best approach they can use, the victims of domestic violence?
Okay, so I was saying that it would be unethical for a lawyer to reject such a brief where somebody really needs their help and not put them in the right, point them in the right direction. It's not as if it's like a commercial brief. This is more of a life and death situation. Somebody needs help to protect their life. So I would just speak generally for my colleagues. Obviously, there are bad eggs in everything, so I can't assume or speak for all my colleagues, but generally, I can say that lawyers will be willing and ready to help. Someone who comes with such a burden to them, point them in the right direction that can protect her, and life.
Okay. Now, are there provisions for pro bono on domestic violence victims?
I know that Lagos State, they have I think part of their ministry to provide pro bono services for indigent persons. So I think that can always be good. So I really know because they can really tell for other things.
Okay. Now, in the closing moments of the program, what is your advice to anyone who is out there or maybe listening to us who is a victim of domestic violence?
Okay, I'll just say this generally. I don't really know your situation, but if you're a man or a woman, please, as for the safety of yourself and your children, it's not God's will, part of God's will for you to suffer such violence at the hand of another human being. No, it's against God's order in a family relationship. Family relationship is about love, it's about peace, it's about joy. And when all those things are absent, there's a problem, especially when it's an abusive relationship. So I would only recommend that as much as possible, if you can find a safe place where you can stay, your life is more important than, such a relationship. So just look out for your safety, look out for yourself. It's not your fault. There's nothing you did that made the person abusive. There's nothing you can do to change the person. The person is just the way they act, has nothing to do with you. And, just like have self-worth in the image of God. And you don't deserve such treatment from another human being.
Okay. And any advice on the part of the government?
I didn't get that.
I said, any advice on the part of the government?
Well, the government, I think those states have adopted those laws, and those states think they're really trying, and just encourage, the police government to not look down on, take seriously domestic cases. Of course, there are issues of false accusations, as I mentioned, as an example of the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case, where it's all started with an accusation. Let me make an accusation. Let me not say it's false. because the matter has not yet been fully decided by the court yet. There's always the risk of accusation. This is why some people are, they already have this, will I say, bias not to take these cases seriously. But I think our bias should be taken seriously, do the right investigation, don't make any comments yet. But first thing is to protect the person who is alleging to be not to punishing the abuser. Protect the victim should be our first goal before we now know what really happened. The victim, you should just go on.
Okay, you've been listening to Know Your Rights, our legal program on Lagoon Radio, your number one online gospel radio in Nigeria. And we've been discussing domestic violence and the law, and we've been talking to Barrister Kene Ago. She is the head legal and investor relations at Get Bondi, an edutech company targeted at secondary school education online. Barrister, thank you so much for educating us this morning. And
thank you very much for having me.
And we hope we can maybe see you in the studio next time. We'll call on you.
Okay.
Okay, and also thank you for listening to the program. And this is where we will draw the curtains on today's edition of the program Know Your Right. It comes your way every Friday, 9:10 a.m. to 10 a.m. From me, Anosike Chimezie, and thanks to our producer for pressing the right buttons, Olumakaiye Ajadi. Till next week when we meet again. Goodbye, and do have a lovely weekend.